Buenos días a todos y a todas. Good morning, everyone. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. My name is Ana Maria Franco. For those who don't know me, I am the International Relations Coordinator at the Faculty of International, Political, and Urban Studies. I'm very happy to be here with all today. We are receiving two professors from the University of Essex that will be introducing themselves in a minute, but we also have Kili, which is my colleague, my counterpart at the University of Essex, and it's basically the one that has been making all this possible on the other side of the ocean. So thank you very much, Kili, for your help in here. We are going to be conducting this space in English, but absolutely feel free to switch into Spanish or maybe pose a question in Spanish as well. I've been told that Sabine and Lars are very good in their Spanish. Well, Sabine and Lars has a good working knowledge of Spanish, let's put it that way. No, not at all. Okay. Okay, so maybe Sabine will be spearheading the Spanish part, and then Lars.
I'm happy to translate any questions. Hello, everybody.
Okay, well, yes, let's move forward. Kili, go ahead. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ana Maria. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's session. As Ana mentioned, my name is Kili Alvarez. I am the International Officer for Latin America here at the University of Essex. We're really excited to be speaking to you all today in relation to the 3+1 agreement that we have with the Political Science Department at Universidad de Rosario. The fantastic benefits of this agreement is that students in the third year of their political science or international relations degree at the University of Rosario can progress onto a master's degree within the Department of Government or 2 programs within the School of Law here at the University of Essex. You also benefit from a 20% tuition fee discount as well. So it's a really fantastic way of getting, in 4 years, getting a bachelor's and a master's degree instead of 5+ years. So it's a really fantastic agreement we have, and we're very proud to be working with Rosario in this agreement. And I'm very happy to introduce Professor Waldorf and Professor Michalowski from our School of Law. They're going to give you a very interesting lecture, taster lecture today. And please, if you have questions at the end, I'll be here as well to answer any questions in relation to the agreement. And yes, enjoy the lecture. Over to you guys.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back at Rosario. I think the last time that Sabine and Kili and I were all at Rosario was February 2020, just as COVID was breaking. And it was really one of the last trips that many of us made. And it was great to be at the university, great to be back with some of you, albeit it's nicer to be there in person. So hopefully, I know Sabine's been in Colombia more recently, and she'll be talking about that. Let me share my screen briefly. I have a very kind of short PowerPoint. I will, so again, what we're going to be talking about today is pursuing accountability for human rights abuses. We're going to just kind of do a quick introduction of ourselves, talk a little bit about accountability and what it's about, particularly the term transitional justice that many of you may already be familiar with. Sabine's going to talk about our work in Colombia. I'll talk a little bit about our work in Sri Lanka. Then we'll talk about research and teaching on accountability at the University of Essex. Talk a little bit about the Transitional Justice Network that Sabine helped create, talk about a Scala, talk about postgraduate modules that you might be interested in taking if you were to come to Essex, and then I'll tell people a little bit about the MA in Theory and Practice of Human Rights. And again, we'll leave plenty of time for any comments, questions that people may have. And let me apologize again, I did take Spanish many, many years ago, but have managed to forget all of it, much to my shame and regret. So let me turn it over to Sabine to just say a couple of words about the Human Rights Center, and then she'll talk a little bit about accountability, just to kind of situate where we are and who we are.
Yes, well, thank you, Lars. Thanks, Anna Maria, and thank you, Keely. It's very exciting. So yes, I was part of that very strange. Well, not very. It wasn't strange. The visit to Colombia. It was just very strange that I got then stuck in Bogota when in mid-March, and it was everything. The world changed, obviously. But as Lars said, I had the privilege of going back to Bogota twice since then, so I'm very happy that we are back to more normal times and that I can pursue my work in Colombia that way. So it's a bit of a mix what we are going to do, as you could see from Lars's introduction, between Essex as a teaching environment, but also as a research environment, because obviously for postgraduate students, it seems important to get a feel for both. And obviously our research, well, basically our research very much informs our teaching. And so this is why we thought we combine the two a little bit. Now, given the topic of the lecture, pursuing accountability for human rights abuses, we thought it would be appropriate to start with briefly saying that Essex has a human rights center, which is actually internationally very well known and recognized. And as part of that, it's an interdisciplinary center. It has more than 100 members at Essex in all sorts of different disciplines. So government, where you would be probably mostly located, is part of that. Lars and I in law form part of it. So it's an interdisciplinary research and also teaching center. And it hosts, in terms of research, but also student-facing activities, it hosts what we are going to talk a little bit about, because we are co-directing it, Lars and I, the Essex Transitional Justice Network. But also we have an Essex Armed Conflict and Crisis Hub. We have the Business and Human Rights Unit, and then we have an autonomy project, which deals primarily in these days, over the past few years, with disability rights. It's the specific focus, also other topics, but that's the specific focus of it. And human rights, big data and technology speaks for itself. So these are just some of the projects hosted in the Human Rights Center, but just to give you an idea of how, of the kind of range of interests we have. And in each of them, we have quite a number of colleagues, and always in different disciplines over the university. So interdisciplinarity is really one of the main strengths, and also of our postgraduate teaching delivery. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you, Lars. So we thought, and I feel a bit strange talking to Colombian students about transitional justice, because I mean, you more or less invented it, and you're certainly living it much more than us. But given that my work at the moment, it might be boring for you, and Lars's Sri Lanka work might be so much more fascinating for you. But the main focus of my work is really on transitional justice in Colombia. And so I just wanted to say a few words about transitional justice first, just in case not everybody is familiar with the more theoretical concepts behind it, even though obviously you will be all very familiar with peace processes and transitional justice mechanisms. So basically, as you will know, transitional justice is really, it's the full range of processes and measures associated with a society's attempt to come to terms with the legacy of large-scale past abuses. And that will, of course, in many cases, be after an armed conflict, and that's very clearly the Colombian case. That your transitional justice process is obviously about trying to come to the transition from this armed conflict to lasting peace. And it is based on 4 key pillars. You have truth, justice, reparations, and guarantees of non-recurrence. I don't really want to go into all of them at the moment, but what I do, obviously, what you can see, and this is something I do want to stress, because very often when I go to Colombia, people there receive me as an international expert on transitional justice, and they want me to have the answers to everything that's happening in Colombia. And what I always say to Colombian colleagues is, actually, you are at the forefront what's currently happening. You are the cutting edge of what's happening in transitional justice these days, and really the world looks at Colombia. So it's very so of course there can be international experiences brought to Colombia, but actually I think at the moment we can learn all much more from Colombia than Colombia can probably learn from the world. So just to state this. And so and I'm saying this also because there has been this in transitional justice, and also pretty much promoted by another Colombian, Pablo de Grave. Some of you might have heard about him. He was the first UN Special Rapporteur for Truth, Justice, Reparations and Guarantees of Non-Recurrence. So, and he developed very much, I mean, it was not him, obviously, only himself who pushed for this, but Pablo really very much promoted, particularly in his role at the UN, this holistic approach to transitional justice based on these 4 pillars that you can see on the slide. And what's interesting about Colombia is that it's really the first country that is trying to implement this and really based its peace agreement between the FARC and the Colombian government, and then the ensuing transitional justice process on this. And this is partly why there is little academic experience or international practical experience on this, because it is really the first time a state has actually committed to such an ambitious undertaking. So it's very fascinating as a transitional justice academic to have the privilege of working with Colombian colleagues on this, because it's just very, very exciting, but also, of course, as you know, very, very complex and extremely difficult, not just politically, as of course it also is for lots of reasons, but also legally it is very, very complicated. It is based on very, very complicated legal frameworks in order to actually achieve this. And of course, as you know, you have all of these, particularly you have the Truth Commission, which will render its final report at the end of June. You have the Jurisdicción Especial para la Paz, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, that's actually, that started its work really in March 2018 and has quite a few years to go. And then of course, reparations and guarantees of non-recurrence are written into the system. Lars, can I have the next slide and say a few words about the particular? Okay, thank you so much. So our work in Colombia, some of you may know my colleague Clara Sandoval, who was also our colleague Clara Sandoval, who was also with us in Bogota in March 2020. Clara is on leave at the moment from the university, but she's a professor at Essex, and she basically founded the Transitional Justice Network. And together with Clara, one of the topics we have been working on was really, we were trying to bring together business and human rights and transitional justice and think about how could so-called economic actors, businessmen, large landowners, etc., be included and integrated in a transitional justice process. And that's another really ambitious undertaking for which we have in terms of truth commissions, we have quite a few worldwide that have actually looked into this. South Africa is an example, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. So there are a few interesting examples, Tunisia, some others. But what is really new in Colombia is that, and this started actually during the negotiations in Havana. We had the privilege, Clara and I, to give some advice to some of the members of the government that were negotiating, and it was really about how can you include economic actors and third-party actors more generally, terceros civiles, in this transitional justice process. And so the way we have been working was so it's a combination of academic work. We're trying to do a conceptual academic work that analyzes how to do this, what's the potential, what are the challenges, but we are also always doing it in very close collaboration with stakeholders in Colombia who are actually working on this in practice. So that was partly the Colombian Ministry of Justice during the negotiations in La Habana. We have been working very closely with Colombian NGO De Justicia, and I'm currently working very, very closely with colleagues in the JEP, in the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. And so, so there are several projects we have at the moment, and what we are primarily trying to do is we are writing. So the way we work is not sit at Essex and think nice thoughts that may or may not influence someone, but rather in conversation. So this is why I go to Bogota regularly. We try to actually develop our research in close collaboration with the Colombian partner institutions, but also really those who we hope will actually make use of this research. So we formulate the questions together. We try to figure out what are the issues that actually really, they really might need some academic input in, and then we write briefing papers, we get feedback on those briefing papers, and then we eventually publish those. And then, and so we have written several papers. So for example, one of the, we have been working on the concept of the most responsible, máximo responsable. We have been working on what does it mean to contribute truth and recognize responsibility as part of the régimen de condicionalidad that is in the REP. On the special sanctions, sanciones propias. So we have really tried to work very, very closely on very topical issues in Colombia. And I'm mentioning this also because students often have the possibility of assisting us with these projects. We, for example, have front-runner placements for students where they get the chance to, for some pay, they can actually work with us for several months on projects. And so that's normally a very good opportunity to really accompany your academic work with some practical work. And so this work on Colombia, for example, at the moment, there are 3 students who are on our PGT programs at the moment helping me with that. So there are all sorts of opportunities for that. But I think I better hand back to Lars, because otherwise we might be running out of time very soon. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. I have worked on transitional justice in 2 countries, which are really very different from Colombia. And so as a result, I tend to be very jealous of Sabine and Clara for working in a country where transitional justice, for all of its problems, is very ambitious. And where the state is really making some real attempt for accountability across the board. So I had worked for many years, first with Human Rights Watch, and then as a researcher on transitional justice in Rwanda for the 1994 genocide. And more recently, while here at Essex, I've been working on Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka is perhaps kind of almost the polar opposite of Colombia. Yes, they both had very brutal civil wars. The one in Sri Lanka went on for about 29 years, so shorter than Colombia's, of course. But the ending of the war was very different. It was a military victory by the government. They completely crushed the rebel forces that were made up of the minority Tamil population, and they were very triumphalist in their victory as well. So they really didn't see, because they had won the war, they didn't see a whole lot of, they adopted language of transitional justice, they adopted language of peace and reconciliation, but they didn't really deliver very much on that. It's really been a very authoritarian victor's peace for the most part. So what we see in terms of accountability in Sri Lanka is very little. There's been no truth commission. There have been really no trials. There has been a little progress, but very halting, made on reparations, and a little progress made on finding missing persons, because again, there were a lot of people who were disappeared during the Sri Lankan conflict. Very little in the way of kind of guarantees of non-recurrence, by which we mean vetting and changing institutions to become more human rights compliant. So where we've seen a little more accountability in Sri Lanka over the years, but not much, has been over corruption. But again, that itself has also gotten very stalled. So one of the things that I faced when I've been working in Sri Lanka is, how do you do transitional? Yes, you've had a transition, but how do you do it where the political climate is so hostile to transitional justice? And so one of the things that a number of us have been doing is turning to the arts and using the arts in a sense to try to empower people to be able to claim their rights. And so I got involved with a very interesting project that had been partly designed and created by a PhD student here at Essex, and working with a German choreographer and a Sri Lankan choreographer. They came up with the idea of combining mixed abled or inclusive dance with rights awareness for people with disabilities. And I found that particularly interesting because of the use of the arts, but also because people with disabilities often get left out of transitional justice processes. Yes, there's been a lot of attention in more recent years to victims of sexual violence, which is very important. There's obviously been a lot of attention to people who were disappeared, but somehow in a lot of countries, people with war-related disabilities have fallen through the cracks. And so that's one of the main things that I've been working on in Sri Lanka, and just got some funding to try to expand that work to Nepal, which also had a long civil war, lots of people disabled as a result of that civil war, and again, a number of stuttering transitional justice processes. So these photos, the first photo is a disabled person in a wheelchair in front of this victory monument, famous victory monument, triumphalist one in Sri Lanka. And then there's a photo from one of the dance workshops that I was involved in. And again, happy to talk more about that and the role of the arts if people are interested. Also to say that this idea of combining the arts and accountability is quite strong at Essex. And so there are a number of colleagues who work in art history and who work in literature, film, theater, and television, who also look at how these different art forms have advanced accountability. And I'll come back to that in just a minute too. So let me move on, and we can say a little bit about the Essex Transitional Justice Network. I'll switch it back to Sabine to say a couple of more words about that, though we've talked a lot about it already, and then I'll come back after that.
Yes, I think there is a little to add to what I've already said, but so as you can see here some figures to what I said, which is that it's a network that is so it's part of the Human Rights Center, as we already said. It has 45 academics across 9 departments, so it's really a very good example of interdisciplinarity at Essex. And at the moment, we primarily work on these 4 main themes: Colombia and arts. We already mentioned. Reparations well, actually, I am at the moment, I have a tunnel vision on Colombia, I have to confess. So everything I do is on Colombia. So to the extent that I work on reparations, it is in Colombia. To the extent that I work on anything, including I work a lot on economic actors, it's again on Colombia, because I mean, there is so much to do at the moment. But in principle, these are broader categories, and other people work on these issues more broadly. But I personally, so just to say these topics are interlinked, and as you could see, Lars is combining arts and reparations. So there are just linkages between the various themes. And I already mentioned that there are these opportunities for paid placements. There are also potentially opportunities for internships more broadly. So there is, yeah, I think at this stage, maybe if you have questions later on, but at this stage, I'll just leave it at that to have some time to discuss the teaching opportunities that are probably of most interest to all of you.
Great, thanks, Sabine. So let me just say a couple of words about Escala. Escala is a great thing, and it should be better known. Escala is the largest collection of contemporary art from Latin America in the UK. And it was really developed there by students. We have a colleague in art history who does a lot of work with students with the collection. But as you can imagine, the collection is very much linked to issues around accountability in Latin America. And we have an art gallery on campus where students curate shows. Every year they bring Latin American artists to the campus. They show their work, and it's really exciting. Let me say a couple of words now about teaching. So again, there are a number of different departments. I'm going to mostly focus here on law, but in the law school, we have a number of postgraduate taught modules that focus on various aspects of accountability. So one thing we have is a clinic that is done through the Human Rights Center. There's approximately 24 students working on 6 projects every year with the clinic. The projects change every year. 2 out of the 6 projects this year were focused on accountability. One was focused on the accountability for UK Special Forces using drones and killing civilians as a result of drone strikes. And the client, if you like, for that particular project was the all-party parliamentary group on drones in the UK Parliament. There was also a colleague of ours who's done a lot of work on international criminal law and at the International Criminal Court, sort of headed up a clinic project for the ICC's Trust Fund for Victims, looking at reparations in refugee camps. So when people who have managed to survive various atrocities, war crimes, crimes against humanity, perhaps genocide, when they're now in refugee camps, how do we get reparations to them? How do we identify them? How are they able to claim reparations? And so in both these cases, a small group of students are being taught kind of about human rights practice, everything from interviewing techniques to ethics to resilience, and then employing it by doing the research and writing a report for the specific client. Other modules.
Sorry, can I just say,
yes,
sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say that next year, again, with my Colombia tunnel vision, I don't know the other projects, but I know there will be one on Colombia and guarantees of non-recurrence and how to define them. And that is together with De Justicia. Great.
Thanks a lot, Sabine, for adding that. And then Sabine and I teach a course on transitional justice. And it's actually been a really fun course to teach over the years. We have in the among the postgraduate class, we actually have quite a number of Latin American students from all over Latin America. And a number of them are human rights activists or lawyers or government officials or NGO workers. And they come and they bring that experience to the classroom, which is just fabulous. We also have colleagues who do a separate module around international criminal law, looking at both procedure and substance of international criminal law, as well as the various different tribunals that have been set up for international criminal law. We also have colleagues who teach a course that looks more broadly at how gender plays a role in peacemaking, peace building, and some of the legal issues around that. And then again, Essex tends to be very strong in business and human rights. So we have other colleagues who work on business and human rights in a number of different contexts, as well as Colombia. Let me say a couple of words very briefly about the MA in Theory and Practice of Human Rights. This has recently been overhauled and expanded. And so now the program has 6 pathways. And students can choose from any of these pathways. And you can see the pathways here. The last one, Human Rights in the Environment, won't come on stream until autumn of 2023, but I thought I would put it here on this list anyway. Basically, the reason for these different pathways is really twofold. One is to have an MA that is responding to some of the current issues in human rights that are of interest and concern, but also as a way of expanding the interdisciplinarity. So again, the MA, for students on the MA, they can take courses in law school, but they can also take courses in government, in psychology, in sociology, in philosophy, in art history, in literature, film, television, theater. So quite a range of opportunities. So again, for people who are on the MA, there is one core compulsory module that you take over 2 terms that sort of introduces you to human rights from various disciplinary lenses. And then after that, people then will take a specific 1-term module in, say, human rights in the arts or global diversity and challenges. And then after that, they have a real range of modules to choose from, again, across all these different departments. And then, of course, there is a dissertation. The dissertation is what we have in the summer term. It's 12,000 words, and it's really an opportunity for students to work on an issue that they care about and that they will do a lot of work themselves on. But then it's an opportunity to also have sort of one-on-one conversations with one of us, a professor or lecturer at the law school, about their particular topic. And sometimes we're also able to get colleagues from other departments who will also serve as dissertation supervisors. So that's really sort of everything from us. In terms of this, I will again pass on to Ana Maria the PowerPoint slides so that you have these links and everything else. But let me stop sharing for the moment. And then if people have questions, or if Sabine wants to come back in, or Keely wants to come back in and add anything that I've missed, feel free. But now it's really your turn, your time.
Thank you very much, Lars. Well, this is the space for questions, guys, un espacio para preguntas, if anyone has any for our professors here today. If not, I have some of my own. That's not a problem. So let's give it a minute. Maybe they're feeling shy. You can pose your questions in Spanish as well. Pueden también ponerlas en español si lo quieren hacer. But or English if you want to practice. Sabine and Lars, I wanted to, I mean, there's obviously many questions that we could stem from what you gave us today. Thank you very much. But it's more of a perception really, but currently and normally it seems that the peace process in Colombia is always in danger, no? And peace is obviously something very difficult to maintain, and we have seen it from the Irish and from many others, but how do you share like this process that we all know? Actually, we don't all agree that is viable, unfortunately, here in Colombia. But I personally do. How do you sort of try and shield this attempt that, in my opinion, is so valuable and hopefully will come out with a good resolution? How do we shield all of this from political forces and political interests, and especially now that we're in election period, we're voting pretty much in 2 weeks' time. So how do you deal with that? And do you think it's in actual danger, or is it shielded enough for it to perhaps continue as much as we can?
I should probably let Sabine answer most of that. Let me maybe just say a couple of very broad things, which is to say, you're absolutely right. I mean, these, you can look at the recent elections in the Philippines. You can look at, obviously, Bolsonaro in Brazil, lots of other places where you have this democratic backsliding and kind of a throwing out of accountability. And so, again, it's a constant struggle. I'll turn it over to Sabine to answer more directly on Colombia.
I mean, it's a really difficult question, obviously. I can just say, I can give you my personal view a little bit. And I think that, I mean, obviously, again, I mean, Colombia really showed us how fragile a peace process is in so many respects, because with all the best of intentions that the negotiators in Havana had, you had the no, obviously in the referendum, you had the no, And then you had a government change then, which really had it was really interesting for me as a lesson, really, how important the political climate of the moment really is, and how much it can change even such a carefully negotiated process as the Colombian. So, but what I do think is, and this is not something that is easily transferable to other countries, but what I really find impressive in Colombia is the role of the Constitutional Court. While I was not particularly happy with all of the decisions they took with regard to the peace agreement and the implementing legislation, I think the very fact that it is enshrined in the Constitution, the implementing legislation and the peace process itself with the I don't know what it's called in English, but with the framework, the legal framework for the peace process and all of that, I think that is a really good example. If you have if you have functioning institutions, and of course I know that they are also to some extent fragile in Colombia, and yet the Constitution, it's just amazing. I remember Lars and we had a panel at Essex maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and a Colombian colleague was there as a fellow at Essex at the time. And so we had a panel on transitional justice in Colombia. And it was just amazing because we were all just staring at him when he was telling us that the Constitutional Court had the final word and it had spoken, and that was it. We were all thinking, wow, if it was like that in the rest of the world would be a much better place, depending on the Constitutional Court they have, obviously. But it was really interesting to us that in such a country, such a war-torn country and conflict-torn country, you have this incredible institution that can, and that is actually really, that it has a lot of strength. So I think that is a really important lesson, that a constitutional court can really play a very, very important role. But another is, I think also how much depends on political will and how much depends on funding the peace process. Because I think one of my biggest frustrations, leaving aside all the polarization and all of the problems with all the different views on the peace agreement, etc., and its implementation, but it was really interesting how the current Colombian government, whatever it says about the peace process, really could change a lot, basically just by underfunding certain areas and then putting money into something else. And you see that everywhere, I guess, that you really have this, how important that really is. So I think, there is no easy answer, but certainly I think the constitutionality is just absolutely crucial in a country like Colombia.
I think the only other thing to add is obviously this, and this is something, again, that strikes me about Colombia in comparison with Sri Lanka, but especially Rwanda, is the strength of civil society and social movements. And that's incredibly important for keeping accountability and democratic processes going. And again, it may take many, many years, but Chile and their new constitution is something that's really, really hopeful.
Yeah, also very messy, no? Like we're watching Chile, at least personally, very closely, and I'm fearful, I must admit, because we obviously, or many of us, supported a new constitution, but then what's happening, obviously, it's evident that it's not as easier as just wanting it. I got a direct message from Gabriela. Thank you very much, Gabriela, and it goes in the lines of what I asked as well, which I think it reaffirms the fact that we're just rather worried about the peace agreement. So she asks, with elections coming here in Colombia, what are the challenges that La JEP and the country in terms of special justice are facing or is facing?
Oof, I guess that goes to me again. This is it's a very good question, a very fair question, and I honestly wish I had the answer. I mean, obviously, first of all depends on who you are going to elect as the next president, because, well, a lot depends on that, as you know better than I do, and depending on where they stand with regard to the peace process. But I personally think, and that might be wishful thinking on my part, but I do think I'm not so worried about the HEP as such. How much the HEP can actually, obviously, it needs political will. It needs to be supported by the state in order to be able to function well. And how, for example, once you get to the stage, hopefully very soon, with the first sanciones propias, etc., it will need a lot of support from the state, because obviously you need to think very carefully about the projects that need to be done, and the state might have to put resources into that particular, if you want to combine it with pedets, which has often been voiced as a possibility. But at the same time, I think, at least as to me, it seems as if the HEP is quite an established institution by now, and that it would be very difficult actually for the state to simply abandon it. I can't honestly, I hope you won't prove me wrong soon, but I really don't see that. I really think and with all the problems, obviously, that I mean, I work very closely with the HEP, and I'm biased, I know that, but I also see many problems, obviously, with its work. But at the same time, I think, particularly the past 2 years, with the first decisions that were made in falsos positivos and secuestros, and now with the audiencias de reconocimiento, I really think there is enough progress to really justify also the continuing its work.
Thank you, Sabine, very much. There's something that I see, and I find it as one of the main problems, that is that basically half of our population cannot and will not and get past the fact of they feel in a way that people are not paying for the crimes. No, that's a big issue for them, you know, that they cannot conceive that they are now sitting in Congress, and that they are now having reduced sentences, and that they're now in a way talking openly about their crimes, and in many occasions not getting, you know, punished for it in a way. How do you get past that? How do you, in a way, and maybe that's a way to introduce arts, maybe that's something where the arts can help us, I'm not sure, but how do you get past that? I think that's probably the main issue here in terms of polarization in the population, and is that people just cannot get past the fact that that we are in a way forgiving them, or we say it in Spanish, like eating a big frog, like you have to eat a frog, and it's that disgusting frog, not to be able to punish these people for what they did. I think that's my question.
Well, you're clearly showing that the Spanish are not the French. The French love their frogs to eat. I think I think maybe 2 or 3 things to briefly say, and then I'll turn it back to Sabine. One is that I think transitional justice has always been quite pragmatic. And I remember a couple of years ago, Pablo de Graaf, as UN Special Rapporteur, talking about the need for what he called principled pragmatism, right? And, you know, the reality is that it is very difficult for any justice system anywhere in the world to hold everybody accountable. So it's just that justice system has not been invented. And so victims will always very rightly feel that full justice has not been served, and that's true. Rwanda went further than any other country in imposing accountability on huge numbers of people. And that's not always good for political stability or for political reconciliation. But again, that's a very sort of different country. But yeah, so those are my quick thoughts, and I'll turn it over to Sabine.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, what I found really striking, because I was in Bogota, maybe, when was I in Bogota? I think the first half of March I was last in Colombia. And so and it was the time when the audiencias de priorización happened. And so I went to one in Bogota, and I listened to some of the I will visit next time, I promise. And I was at the HEP in one of the audiences and one of the hearings, and it was really interesting because what I got out of that is that so much pedagogy is necessary. And I think sometimes, particularly us as lawyers, forget that we have the legal framework and then we just kind of think, okay, we just implement it and everything will be fine. And obviously that's not the case. And it was really striking that the HEP is doing so much work with victims, and yet, and obviously so many civil society organizations are working with victims, but the expectations victims have are just, I mean, it was just really, it was, I don't know, it was really, really sad to see that. I found it really, really sad because, you listen to the victims and my feeling was they had even, at least the victims, I know that in Colombian society, there is a lot of feeling that there should be stronger punishment, etc. But what I found even more difficult than that, just to add to the problems maybe rather than resolve them, is that so many can't live with the idea that their case won't be prioritized and that their case will actually not even be heard. So forget about the sanctions. They just want at least the truth. They at least want to have acknowledged that something happened to them and that they suffered and that they were victims. And I found that so sad that it's just not possible to do that with all victims, and that there were so many who were so frustrated by the process. And I didn't really hear, at least from the victim side and those who were there, I didn't really hear so much the worry about the sanctions. It was really about the prioritization and selection of cases. And that, I think, is another really, really big problem. So yeah, and I think the only, as Lars said, I think it's impossible. And I mean, there are reasons, obviously, why the system is the way it is and you know them probably better than I do. But I think in that sense, and also to answer very badly maybe, but the question in the chat, I think really a lot of pedagogy is necessary with everybody, so that, but I mean, what I find striking, I came to, obviously I've been working in the UK for decades now, and I am German and have my legal education from Germany, and then went to the UK, and now I do a lot of work in Colombia. But what I found really striking is the lack of trust. And I think to re-establish that, I honestly don't know how to do it. I think this might be a starting point, hopefully. So, for example, last week I listened, or 2 weeks ago, I listened to this audience, the Audiencia de Reconocimiento, and I did feel that there is at least some idea of reconciliation, as long as those who are actually there and recognizing their wrongdoing are sincere about it. I got the feeling that was actually really something very, very powerful for victims. But of course, as soon as they basically, you get the feeling they're just going through the motions to get the more lenient sanctions, it just is not working at all. So I think, yeah, it can only be a first step. And I think as a first step, what's happening is very, very good. But how you rebuild trust after more than 50 years of conflict that to some extent is still ongoing, obviously, it just is something that will take a lot of time, unfortunately. So it's not something you can do in a period of 4 years, 5 years, or whatever. It's just unfortunately not possible, I think.
Well, thank you very much. Lars, do you have any? We have 5 minutes left. If we want to make good use of them, maybe some final remarks, and obviously thank you in advance for your time today. I would love to sit here and discuss. Sabine, next time you come to Colombia, please come here. I will buy you a coffee. I'll show you around. I think that would be nice. You're welcome, and obviously Lars as well, if you find yourself somewhere around here.
Yeah, no. It's your offer of a coffee reminds me. Sabine and I came a number of years ago to Bogota for to kind of 2 day, very intense 2 days session about awarding grants, research grants to Colombian and UK researchers working on Colombia. And so you had all these incredibly jet-lagged people from the UK, and they kept being dosed with coffee, and it got very tense. So I think there needs to be maybe a little more herbal tea in Colombia, just a suggestion. But more seriously, I think that Yeah, I guess, for all the problems that Anna Maria, you and others have highlighted, I do think that Colombia is a beacon, right, for lots of people in the rest of the world, right? You are doing things that are more ambitious than anybody else has attempted, and more holistic than anybody else has attempted, as Sabine was saying earlier. And so you, for better or worse, have become a real test laboratory for trying to do transitional justice as best as possible. And that's a great thing, but also a lot of responsibility. And we're all kind of holding our breath and praying that things work out in Colombia, and show us the way and we can learn best practices or good practices that we can maybe apply in other places where you don't have such strong constitutional courts, you don't have such strong social movements or civil society, etc. I guess finally, I would say that in terms of David's question, he's right. I mean, the big issue in all peace processes are the spoilers, and how do you bring them in and how do you keep them engaged in good faith? And I think that's very, very difficult. And in the short term, you buy them off. In the long term, I think, as Sabine was saying, it's got to be about education and trying to educate the next generation not to repeat the mistakes of their elders. Thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to meet and talk. It's just been a real pleasure, as always.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I guess we've come to the end of our time, right? So I promise next time, if you have me, I'll visit, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We can maybe arrange a space with students and more like have a chat over a tea or a coffee. So thank you very much, Lars, Keely, Sabine, and obviously all of you guys, students. We're here for you. So thank you very much, and see you next time. Have a lovely afternoon over there.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Adios.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.